Good afternoon. I'm Rob Campbell, Senior Manager at WHC. We will start our session shortly. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind you, be sure to check out our event platform where you can find information about WHC consulting and WHC certification, as well as sponsor and attendees. So between sessions, please be sure to browse around and engage where you can. I want to thank our sponsors once again. Without their support, events like the Conservation Conference would not be possible. Now we'll begin our session. It is my pleasure to introduce WHC's Senior Manager and the moderator of this session, Daniel Goldfarb.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to championing. Share my. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome everyone to championing equality, access, and empowerment in conservation. I am Daniel Goldfarb. I'm a Senior Manager of Conservation Projects at the Wildlife Habitat Council, and it's great to be here with you today. We have two great people who will share with you their perspectives and experiences in conservation, and they will talk about their work. Let me see. I can also, yeah, there we go. Today we have Atiya Wells and Brian Yopp, and I hope I'm pronouncing your names and last names properly, and I'm doing it the Latin way. Atiya Wells is a pediatric nurse, outdoor educator, and the founder, executive director of Backyard Basecamp, a nonprofit with a mission to reconnect Black, Indigenous, and people of color to land and nature. While learning more about our natural world, she often noticed that she was one of the few, if not the only person of color in the room. By diving into research and history, she learned that ancestral wounding and historical trauma are key players to the lack of diversity in nature-based programming. She has since dedicated her time to slowly reintroducing her community to nature by starting their own backyards and eventually embarking on a journey into the many wild spaces across Baltimore. We also have today Brian Yopp, who is the Director of Programs and Operations of the MotorCities National Heritage Area, an affiliate of the National Park Service, dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and promoting the automotive and labor heritage of the state of Michigan. It could be Indiana too, but having been born and raised in Detroit, Brian has always been surrounded by the rich heritage of Southern Michigan and enjoys the opportunity to connect the stories across the region. He has been part of the MotorCities National Heritage Area team since 2007. His role is to oversee all programming and grants, bridging the gap between the project's conceptualization and its realization. The primary role as a coordinator of the community partners across MotorCities, 10,000 square miles. So today in our session, so welcome everyone. And what we decided to do was to give 5 minutes or so to each member, session presenter, and to talk about your work, to share visuals and ideas with all of us. And then I will moderate a discussion or a conversation really. And then later on towards the end, take questions from attendees. So who wants to start? Brian, would you like to start? I know we just tried the video and everything is working out, so please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Danielle, and appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conference here. It's, really an honor, though I think I'm treading into some waters that hopefully I can be very contributory to this discussion, because I think we have an exciting project to share with you, and a thing that aligns very much with the theme of this session and the themes of the conference. So hopefully everyone's seeing my screen. We are, let me make sure. There we go. Okay, so we'll talk to you today about the Motor Cities National Heritage Area, but just as most people do, they ask the question of what the heritage area is, and Daniel briefly explained that we are an affiliate of the National Park Service. So we are a program underneath the umbrella of the U.S. National Park Service that's normally used to managing large landscapes and properties. So, you think of Yellowstone, you think of the Washington Monument, you think of the Grand Canyon, National Park Service. But we, as a National Heritage Area, represent a cultural landscape, a footprint that the Park Service recognized as extremely important to the country's history. We are one of 55 heritage areas around the country. So our mission is to preserve and promote automotive and labor heritage, whereas there's the Abraham Lincoln Heritage Area in Springfield, Illinois, that talks about Lincoln's story, or Rivers of Steel in Pittsburgh that explores that history, or maybe the Aviation National Heritage Area in Dayton that talks about the impact of the aviation industry to that region in the world. So we have the unique opportunity to talk about Michigan's automotive and labor heritage. Again, our mission is to preserve and promote that rich heritage while also supporting and enabling and respecting the diversity, equity, and an inclusive environment. These are founding partners for Motor Company, now Stellantis, formerly Chrysler, and Daimler Chrysler, and FCA, and some others, General Motors, the United Auto Workers, and of course the National Park Service. So it gives you an idea of sort of the partnership and the expectation of the heritage area, what our role is in our community. Our footprint, 10,000 square miles of southeast and central Michigan. So if I use my handy Michigan mitten map, let me move it into the screen, we are sort of in this bottom corner of the state. And that's the footprint that we cover. 16 counties, over 6 million residents live in this area, and each one of them has a sort of a role to play in a unique part of the automotive and labor heritage of our region, all the way down to the border of Monroe. We actually may be the only international heritage area, and we also help to tell the story of automotive in Windsor, Ontario, which is right across the Detroit River from us. So excited to have been part of that. And today's discussion, as we talk about the programming across this region and the labor heritage, really focuses very heavily on that. We're going to talk about the 4th Street Bridge Park, which is recently constructed right between the city of Detroit and Dearborn in Michigan. Most people are very familiar with Detroit, but Dearborn is its neighbor. It's the home of the Ford Motor Company, so it's pretty well known in the automotive community. But just to give you some geographic perspective, if you're not familiar with the area, we're right there. And the image you see on your screen is actually an image of the 4th Street Bridge as it was constructed in the 1920s. This bridge crosses over the Rouge River between the city of Dearborn and the city of Detroit. So on March 7th, 1932, about 3,000 unemployed workers and community citizens gathered, and they were going to march on Ford Motor Company, on the Rouge plant that is right across the bridge from this location. So they mustered at this bridge to march towards the plant, and they had a list of demands for Henry Ford and Ford Motor Company to play an active role in helping those who were displaced, those who were hungry and suffering. You got to remember that in 1932, we were just outside of the recovering still from the Great Depression. So people were literally hungry in the streets. So the march was indeed for that. They had demands of how to help youth, how to help the homeless, how to feed the hungry, and just be better community citizens. So they were marching and mustering towards that space. But when they got there, they were met with resistance, violence. They were met by Dearborn police and Ford security, where violence broke out, gunfire broke out. And unfortunately, the day of the event, 4 people died from gunfire there. So it's known as the Ford Hunger March, or some people call it the Ford Massacre, depending on what side I think you sit on. But that is where we stood with that. And this newspaper actually doesn't acknowledge, because unfortunately a 5th person passed away a few weeks later from his injuries. So 5 people died that day. These are the 4 that were buried at the nearby Woodner Cemetery. The 5th one, an African American who died later on, also he couldn't have been buried there, unfortunately, because of segregation rules. But that's a conversation for another day. But this is the memorial, and this is sort of the impetus, at least for us, when we think about our mission of preserving automotive and labor heritage, that this is a key moment in the labor movement. This event happened in 1932. It predated the formation of the UAW even in 1935. So this was before there was sort of formal representation of automotive workers and role for the United Auto Workers to play in the community relations between the companies, the industry, and the community. So it's a huge point. We call it a seminal moment sort of in the development of the auto story. So from that moment, we fast forward to this moment. This is the space, the park that we just recently constructed that is just on the other side of the new 4th Street Bridge. If you can see on your upper right-hand corner of the screen, this is the same location of the original 4th Street Bridge. Unfortunately, that bridge was torn down. And with the, yes. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Danielle.
Yeah, I was pointing out that the slides were not moving to the attendees, so I'm trying to figure it out. Sorry to.
Okay, I was telling a great story there. So you are still looking at the first slide? Is that what's happening? Have you seen the first slide, or what are you seeing?
We're still in the first one, the introductory championing equality. Yeah, MotorCities.
Okay. Let me try this.
I don't have control over. There we go.
Are you seeing?
Can you see it? And now we have the picture right before the video.
Okay, great. That's interesting. Okay, so you missed some great stuff. Well,
thank you.
Rest assured that they were wonderful, rich images of the history of the park. I'll scroll backwards then, and Daniel, let me know if you're seeing this now. So if I go backwards, are you seeing that image now? Okay. All right. So just to recap what I was talking about, this is when the folks were mustering on the bridge to march towards the plant. They were met with resistance and violence. Gunfire ensued. The headlines read that 4 died, actually 5 died as a result of this. And this is the burial of those 4, with the 5th one being buried. His ashes were actually, he was cremated and ashes were sprayed across. So that all of that led us to this moment. So now you're seeing the new 4th Street Bridge Park. So we're all caught up. And I was pointing out that in the upper right-hand corner of this image, the new bridge that was installed beginning in 2012 replaced that first bridge that I showed in the first image. That was important because with that bridge went a state historical marker that detailed the events of the Hunger March. So that was sort of an unconscionable loss to us, being historians of this story. We wanted to make sure that that material was not lost. So in fact, we solicited the Michigan Department of Transportation as our partners and launched into an amazing odyssey to build this park, this half-acre space that abuts the river, that is on a state road, that has to be approved by the city of Detroit, that has international waterway implications. So it's really as easy as it sounds in building this park. But it was really a partnership, the Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership that we're a big part of, that championed this cause and created the park space. So we were able to get to the point where last October we cut the ribbon, opened the park. In the center of that, the person holding the big scissors is actually a descendant of one of the 5 who died in the Hunger March. We were able to bring that story full circle and allow them to be part of that recognition. And right now, I'm just going to show you some video. Hopefully, it's playing through. This is just some aerial footage of the park. You see the beautiful statue in the middle. That is actually created from salvaged parts from the original bridge, salvaged parts and gears. We had a local artist fabricator create that and utilize it. The park is designed to be the meeting place of the environment, the industry, and the community. So we tell all of those stories there. There's interpretive signage in the park, for instance, that's intended to make sure that that story is represented. There's also a blatant environmental place. This is video of the ribbon being cut as we celebrated there with officials from the state, the county, and the U.S. government. There's also a fountain in the middle of the park as a rainwater, stormwater demonstration. So a lot of stories being told in this compact space, in this half an acre being brought together. I think we're going to see a shot here of there's the statue again. The statue is titled March On, in the spirit of those who are involved in this, and the indomitable spirit of those who will continue to be stewards of it. We also have interpretive signage on the Hunger March, on the Rouge River's history, on the community's history. We have these fun frogs who represent, again, as I mentioned, the Fort Rouge Gateway. It's our frog is our acronym, but they are part of the water management display along with that fountain in the middle. So the park really is come out beautifully after years of work, and it got coverage here. You see coverage from our local news as those who came out to view it, and it's open for the public. So we couldn't be more proud of the work that went into it, but there's tremendous effort and partnership that went there. We were sort of at the lead of it and having to be the funder and to maintain the donations, but at the same time, it was such a communal effort from so many diverse partners. You had Ford Motor Company and the UAW. You had Marathon Petroleum Company partner with environmental groups like the Friends of the Rouge and Friends of the Detroit River. So we're very proud of the partnership element that came out of this. And I think today's discussion will dig a little deeper into how that happened and why it was so important to us.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I've had the honor to visit this space a couple of times, and yeah, it's really precious. It's it mixes all those components that you mentioned about culture and history and nature. So it's wonderful. Thank you, and we'll get a chance to talk more about it.
Absolutely.
So, and I was thinking, Atiya, would you like to share your work with Backyard Basecamp?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Can you all see this here?
Yes, a PowerPoint.
Yes, I'm trying to move this little dialog box so I can do this thing. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Atiya Wells. As Danielle said, I am a pediatric nurse and the founder and executive director of Backyard Basecamp here in Baltimore City, Maryland. And what I'm going to talk about mostly is our Bliss Meadows project, which is a 10-acre land reclamation project here in Northeast Baltimore. And what we've done is essentially we've weaved together public and private land to create this 10-acre green oasis right in our neighborhood. And so I live in a predominantly Black, Indigenous, and people of color neighborhood. We also have many immigrants and refugees that get resettled in this area. We're the largest neighborhood in Baltimore City. We have over 30,000 residents in this one neighborhood alone. And we're about 2.5 square miles wide. And so we did not have any community green space prior to us starting this project. And so when I found that we had a park around the corner from my house, I worked pretty closely with our city agencies and some other partners to figure out how a community can sort of steward their own green space and create the space that they wanted to see. And so again, Bliss Meadows is made up of 3 different parcels of land. The first being this Barber and Parkwood Park, which is a 7-acre park. It's all wooded right now. It will remain wooded. It's like one of the few forests that we have left in an urban environment. So we want to keep that aesthetic as much as possible. And area number 2 is a 2.5-acre. This was a previously vacant lot as well. We have 2 ponds on this property that are fluent with frogs right now, speaking of frogs, and frogs and dragonflies, and a lot of urban wildlife have called this place home for the past couple of years that it's been vacant. And then area number 3 is a vacant house that had been vacant for some years, and we fundraised to purchase this house in 2019. We were able to raise over $60,000 in a month to buy that house, and we're working on renovating it out to be sort of like a nature center and our hub of operations where our offices and things will be held. And so all of this land had been previously vacant prior to us starting this project. All 10 acres of it was vacant, even the park. That land was donated to the city agency in about 1978, and there had been no maintenance or anything to it. So we have sort of taken that on as a community with some volunteer groups and everything. And then the farmland, we started an urban farm on that site. We now have chickens and goats, and we keep bees. We planted a large orchard in April because even though we are the largest neighborhood in Baltimore City, we only have one grocery store that's supposed to service all of our residents. And so we wanted to ensure that our community had access to some fresh, healthy produce. And this next slide is sort of an overview of what it will look like, or what we're trying to design it to look like. And so is this little dialog box in the way?
No.
Okay. So if you look at the overview, like an aerial view, we have the house, we have the farm, which a large area of that farm is going to be about 1.5 acres of native meadow. So we're planting a lot of native plants to support the wildlife. that have called this place home for the many years that it had been vacant. And then we're going to have an extensive trail system put into that park with some nature play spaces for the children in our neighborhood. We have done a lot of work in this past year to sort of get the land accessible and safe for community members to start walking through and coming through. And so this summer, we're actually going to be starting a summer camp for some preschool age kids. And so we've called it like a farm and forest school. So we'll be doing gardening and farming in the morning, and then afternoon free play in the woods after that. And the house is still in the works of being renovated. So once that house is complete, that is where our offices will be again. Also where we'll have some indoor growing space. We want to try growing some mushrooms and things. Hopefully in the basement we'll be able to do that. And then we'll have a teaching kitchen on the main floor, so that not only will we be able to educate our neighbors on how to grow and harvest fresh food, but we'll be able to, harvest that food, bring it inside, and then teach a community cooking class and how you then turn the food that you have just harvested into a meal. Because we found that a lot of our neighbors believe that eating healthy is just eating 3 salads a day, which we know is not true. There's also this preconceived notion that healthy food does not taste good. And so we really just want to showcase how you can turn these meals, like you can make these meals healthy by eating the same things that you currently eat, just adding a little bit more, taking, a little bit, taking a little bit away, and just, continuing to season, season and use spices as needed. And that is my little intro. I will.
It's wonderful. Atiya, how did you go through some sort of personal transformation that led to valuing the space that nobody else was paying attention to? How did that happen? And how were you able to bring the community into the program?
So I don't think I kind of went through a large transformation, I would say. I am originally from Newark, New Jersey, which I call the Baltimore of New Jersey. We have sort of the same types of population, the same socioeconomics, the same sort of historical and systemic segregation. And so I didn't end up going on my first hike until I was 22, and I was living here. And that is when I sort of started getting interested in nature. And I sort of had this transformational experience on that first hike, although I thought, my husband, we were just dating at the time. I thought he was going to drop me off in the woods or something because I've been watching The Sopranos. And so I was a little afraid, but as we sort of hiked through, I got more comfortable and I started feeling so much better. I was like really stressed out in nursing school at the time. Yeah, and so when we started having kids, we started bringing our kids with us hiking, and they hated every moment of it. And so just like getting into the car was a struggle. And so I was like, we really need a place that we can walk to, and we can turn that walk to the park into something fun. And I also remember thinking, like, I live on the busiest street in Baltimore, ain't gonna be no nature around here. But I ended up pulling my house up on Google Maps, and when I zoomed out, I saw that park. And I was like, oh snap, we have a park around here. And I honestly thought it was just like a ball field, because most parks in the Black neighborhoods in Baltimore tend to be like soccer fields or football fields, or just like mowed areas, not really like wild, or what some would consider wild, like wilderness nature spaces. So me taking a walk around the corner and realizing that we had an actual forest, that was amazing to me, just to know that like it was so accessible to us, because I had also this preconceived notion that like being in the wilderness or going outside or going on a hike, like we always had to drive to those places. So having that so accessible to us, I just wanted to make sure that our community knew more about it. And so our community engagement process had been us like knocking on people's doors and like telling them what we were doing and how we were going to transform this space, and getting their input and feedback on how they intended to use the space, if they intended to use the space, and like what kind of things would they want to see, because remember, these lands have been vacant for years, so people have been avoiding these places. And so now that work is being done and people see work being done, they're starting to come in and provide that input and feedback to say like, it would be really nice if we had this thing. It'd be really nice if you had a tent. It'd be really nice if you had some shade. And so we use all of that input and feedback as we are designing our programs and things to ensure that we are creating a space for our community and that they see themselves also using the space.
Wonderful. And Brian, probably the same question to you, because I should say that why, the reason why we thought of you and your work to bring you to this session and to bring you to the conference is the way that you inspire us by the placemaking work that you do, that you really pay attention to places at all kinds of scales, from the small, what we think of as small scale woodland, to a very large region of the Detroit Dearborn area. So that's, I think, what draws us to your work that is so difficult to do in so many places, including the area of Chicago where I work. And so we're definitely inspired by that. But Brian, did you also, in tackling this very large area, the 10,000 square miles, how do you go about bringing all the partners together? And then eventually, how do you connect with the communities where they live and work? And especially in the area of conservation, the natural and undegraded areas. Yeah. This region.
The key is partnership. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to put it besides that, to say that there has to be that partnership, that there's not a top-down model. There's not an ivory tower management where we say this is how it's going to be. It is, like Atiya said, you have to engage them in the space that they are, because they are ultimately the stewards of their area. In fact, the map I showed earlier, well, you probably didn't see it, but the map of our area, the Michigan Mitten, I threw up there, Southeast Michigan area that we cover, 10,000 square miles, is divided into what we call stewardship communities. We say that you, Lansing, which is our state capital, you're the stewards of your story. My role is to connect with them and say, well, what's going on locally that we can help to elevate? What's going on here that may be liable for a grant, or one partner doesn't know the other partner, and you bring these two pieces together and you have some beautiful music. So that's the idea, is that our role is to be the connector, the convener, the catalyst, for these conversations, and to bring it all together. We oftentimes are the neutral party as well. I mean, when you think about the park, that's exactly what the situation was, in that it wasn't the sort of situation that City of Detroit could only do by themselves, or City of Dearborn could only do by themselves, because the bridge literally crosses between two cities. It wasn't the sort of story that only Ford Motor Company could tell, or only the United Auto Workers could tell. But we bring them together and they can share with it. It's not a story that is just environmental and then not industrial, or vice versa, because it's in one of the most heavily industrial zip codes in the country. And so when the person asks, why build a park there? I tell them, in your asking of the question, you've already answered it. That's why you build a park there, is because those people deserve that respite in that space, in that area to operate in as well. So it's really about listening to the partners and about being engaged in what their needs and interests are, not necessarily saying this is what you're going to get. And with the process of creating the park, it was, first of all, Michigan Department of Transportation being gracious enough to say, instead of this being just a mowed lawn, we're going to give you this space to program it. We're not going to own the park. The community group doesn't own it. The state still owns it. But we've been given the opportunity to program it and create this park space. And then we went from there to engage in community discussions, to, of course, to do the fundraising. And that's the how you do it. But then the why story comes from the individuals, the families that live there and want to be engaged in it, the families who live there. I told you that in the image of the ribbon cutting of the park, that was an ancestor of one of the 5 people who died there. That story is very personal to them. And when the day we started the fundraising, the family made their donation and said, please keep us informed. And all the way from that day one to the day we cut the ribbon, we stayed connected with it. She is the great niece of one of the gentlemen who died, and her dad, who died right after the park was open, was named after his uncle. So the connection there and the story there was important. As we wrapped up the fundraising, we also got a donation from a person who used to live in Southwest Detroit and moved to California, but he made the donation in the name of his neighbor, who said he would have been so appreciative of somebody taking the time and paying attention to his neighborhood and not abandoning it and not leaving it behind and not saying, well, why bother, but saying, we want to build this space here for you to enjoy. And so that donation was probably made in his name, and now it's engraved in the park forever. So those are the whys that sort of motivate us and drive us in our partnerships.
Wonderful, very special. Yeah, and I noticed in your website and the MotorCities website how well you tell stories of people and places. What are people asking now for more memorial parks and more spaces like that, the one that you were able to accomplish? Is there, yeah.
Is it in high demand? How are we going to stay in the park building business? I don't know.
Now that you have one beautiful place, are there more coming? Yeah.
It's a tremendous amount of work, and my hat, if I had a hat off, my hat would be off. Daniel, your hat is off as well to Atiya and those who really endeavor in that place making. So I give all the credit to those who operate in that space. You know, our friends in our environmental groups and our Detroit Link Greenways and those who really are champions for that. I would say that building additional parks, we would have to take it case by case. But I think that we've done a great job in doing things like installing interpretive signage around our region. We've installed 300 small panel signs that are in communities and neighborhoods that people traffic. So that if you're in your downtown, if you're at your city hall, if you're on your bike trail, you'll come upon one of our 3-foot signs that talks about a story of the reason why, not just the region, but why is your city, why is your neighborhood and community so important to the automotive story? It's because you made the sprocket or you made the part that went to the big factory, that went into the Model T, that put the world on wheels, that you played that part. Or that some person came up with the greatest idea ever, and it came from that neighborhood. They live down the street from where you live now. And so I think that's the way that we connect to the people. And then there's never a shortage of stories. We've existed since 1998. We serve a living industry, and it continues to evolve, and new stories emerge every day, and people are affected by it differently. And when I look at generations to come, what will mobility look like for them? Automobiles won't be the same as they are now because they're already changing, and the companies are embracing that. So 20 years from now, we'll be telling a different story. Hopefully, I'll still be sitting right here telling that story, but we'll be telling a different story. And I think that's the thing we have to embrace, is that constant change and being open to their input. So yes, there's always a demand for new projects. We have a round of grants open for next year, and we're already getting a lot of great inquiries for oral histories of people, and being able to install lasting exhibits and landmarks for those individuals and those communities that made this big difference. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, we'll see how it changes, with electric cars and the future. When I was looking at the work of Atiya and Backyard Basecamp, I love the perspective of coming to conservation from a nurse practitioner, from a public health perspective, rather than the very scientific top-down approach that I had to experience when I came to the United States and learn from. And so I'm inspired by that. I love the walks that you organize. Would you want to share more details of how you bring adults? We often think about kids as an easy target for our audience, I should say. I should watch, but it's an easy audience. But what about adults? It's so much more difficult, I think.
Yeah, I found, my work as a nurse, when I was working at bedside, I was a pediatric nurse, so I was working with kids, with children. And, I've seen so many children just like live their lives in the hospital or at home within the 4 walls of their hospital room, within the 4 walls of whatever room they're in at home. And so I really, wanted to ensure that my children got outside as much as possible, because I wasn't like a nature kid, but I was like a street kid. Like we were out until the street lights came on. And that's just how, we grew up, and that's how most of us grew up in that era. And so I wanted my children to experience that. And so once we started going into like the nature walks and things, once I had my transformational experience on that hike, I wanted to invite as many people out there, because I was like, people need to know about this. They need to know. They need to feel this way. And really quickly, like people started asking me like, hey, Tia, do you know what this is? Do you know what this plant is? Do you know like where the bears are? And I was like, what? And so I really found that like, if I'm going to be leading people outside, I should probably know a little bit about like what's out there. Like I should really know what poison ivy actually looks like. And I should know, like what the venomous snakes are that live in Baltimore, just know a little bit about the hazards. And so once I started like going to all these classes and workshops, like I kept, you mentioned it in my bio, like I was always either the only Black person or one of the few people of color in the room. And I kept wondering, like, where are my people at? And so when I came to just this work, I just wanted to be the face that I was missing. I wanted to bring in the culture that I wish was prevalent when I was going through these classes. And I know that that's not just important for children, but for adults to see themselves in these roles as well. I'm one of the co-organizers of Black Birders Week, which just ended last week. And one thing that we noticed last year when we started is that people were saying, like, I thought I was the only Black birder, or like I thought I was the only Black person who liked nature like this. And so to really be that sort of global connection of like of what representation looks like in this field, yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and I just wanted to, I'm hopeful that like more people start doing adult focused programs. You did mention that a lot of people always try to like focus on the kids because that's where the money is. But like adults sort of need or want, you know, they want to be seen, they want to be heard. And all of our programming is family friendly. So we really encourage people to bring their children with them. And I will say, you know, as a mother of 2 children, I am married, but like our work schedules are in such that like we're never like together pretty much. And so my kids are with me about 90% of the time. And some programs and things like I would never feel comfortable bringing my kids with me because like I know nobody else is bringing their kids. So it's like when you know for sure that there will be other children there, you sort of feel that sense of community, that village building is what we call it. And you know the kids can sort of play by themselves while the adults are doing their thing, and building that intergenerational programming model I think is really important as we move forward.
No, that's awesome. Representation, that's, I mean, that's a like a key term in this, in the title of this session, even championing equity, equality, access, and empowerment. There's a gap. The gap is real, and even though it was not intentional in the sense that there's no way we could have planned that the park we're building is in the location that it is because of the historical significance, but when you talk about the demographics of where it is absolutely this on the tip of Detroit, you know, and a heavily African American and Hispanic community, and the representation there was critically important. These are stories of their community that, you know, in essence have been wiped away. And if you allow it to die there, and that's why I said that when they were tearing down the bridge and they took away the marker, it's like saying you're going to strip away a piece of this story and you're going to have to file it away. You know, they're not going to put a new marker there because it's not the same bridge. So it's up to us to pick it up and run forward with it and say, let's make something out of this and make sure that your story is reflected in this permanent public space. And that was really the driving force behind it. It just so happened that, you know, that it was in this location that the park needed to be built anyway, so it worked out well. But that's great insight, sure.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, I'm sure, Brian, you've come across this when people are like, well, why are you building it there? And you're like, why not? Like, Black people deserve parks too. Like, we deserve nice neighborhoods as well.
No, absolutely. I said anytime somebody asks me that question, I kind of say you've actually already answered your question by asking and challenging why build it in this most polluted area, why build it in the shadow of these industrial giants like Ford Motor Company and the petroleum company, why put a park there? You know why, because what you just described is there's a gap, there's a missing piece there that the community wants and needs. There were times where when we were at these community meetings, that was all that we received was that feedback. I'm so glad you're doing this. Nobody ever came in and said, why bother? I don't want this. I don't want to look out and see this. And I also have to give a shout out to the general efforts of, you know, a giant in that area, Marathon Petroleum, who owns if we've got a half an acre, they own the surrounding 100 acres. And they've made a commitment to Marathon Gardens and to their wildlife habitat. And there's a lot of work being done to be very progressive in that way. So they've been great, you know, partners and neighbors in that. And everybody can say, you're not doing all you can do. You have to start doing something. You have to start moving things forward. And that's what their effort has been. So the park fits into this broader landscape. Their efforts, and environmentalists I mentioned, like the Friends of the Rouge River, are working on things. And the bikeway, the bridge is a bikeway connector from the Detroit Link Greenways to the Downriver Link Greenways in a way that now brings these people together and is spurring activity on the overall. The governor created a overall heritage trail, the Iron Bell Trail, because it goes from Ironwood in the top of Michigan all the way down to Belle Isle, which is a park in Detroit, and you can bike the entire route. And our park is a node in that, that story. So it wasn't just for the fun of it. It really connected to a broader framework. And now they're working on even a nice gateway feature across the street from that. It introduces people to that whole story. So that little bit of effort, that spark of inspiration is continuing to pay dividends for sure.
Yeah, those first steps are always the most difficult ones, but yeah, they define the rest of the project, the rest of the effort, and I'm so glad that you introduced those projects and the ideas to your communities. What if we talk a little bit more about your programming? I think in so many ways, each organization is so unique. Atiya, if you want to talk about your Walk with the Nurse or some of the your other programs that you already have in place, and then how that is impacting or pushing you to get the rest of the project or the rest of the campus completed.
Yeah, so our programming, we sort of have fit them into 5 pillars, but they're not siloed, where they're more like interwoven like a basket with environmental justice and cultural relevancy. And so those 5 pillars are animal husbandry, environmental education, conservation, community green space, and food access. And so under our animal husbandry pillar, I told you we have like chickens, goats, we keep bees. We're looking into getting some sheep so that we can shear them, dye the wool, teach people how to spin it, and then do like some knitting. And so, we have these pillars, and we're teaching people, how do you keep animals in the city? What do you need? What process do you have to go through so that your animals aren't taken away from you? What do you need to feed them? Like, make sure you have access to water. What kind of housing do they need to have? So that is like one of the programs that we do. Our environmental education also has a community science arm, and we call it community science. I know there's like this big argument between what's citizen science, what's community science. We call it all community science because a lot of our neighbors are not US citizens, and we know that words do matter. And so those programs look like, our Nest Watch. So we have some bird houses, and so people are welcome to go and see, like, if the birds are nesting, count the eggs that are in there. And we heavily use iNaturalist. So if somebody's just walking around, they can take a picture of something cool that they find or something cool that they say, and they can upload it to our project. And that sort of gives us a survey of the insect, bird, mammal, wildlife, everything that exists on the site. And under that also is the Traverse with a Nurse program, which are essentially plant walks, but they're more like nature walks. I tried to be like a botanist and like focus only on plants, but I'm more of a generalist naturalist. And so like when we're out there, we may say, we're gonna look at plants today, but if I see a bird, I'm gonna point out that bird. If I see a cool tree, I'm gonna point out that tree. If we come across a deer, we're gonna talk about deer. And so they're more like general nature walks. Our conservation arm is more of the native meadow that I talked about. So planting some native plants to support our pollinators and our wildlife, and what that looks like, and what kind of plants those are, what they look like when they bloom, making sure that we have something that's blooming across all months to feed our pollinators. Having access to community green space, because we have these 10 acres of previously vacant land that we now are stewarding to create this space and to cultivate a relationship with our neighbors and to help them feel comfortable in this space. And then we have our food access arm. As I mentioned, we are the largest neighborhood. We have 1 grocery store. So providing access to fresh, healthy vegetables and fruit and nuts now, because we have planted that orchard, our neighbors can come and like pick whatever they want to. So if they're going to have dinner and they need some kale, they can come and pick some kale from a raised bed. Or if they, want to get some peaches, they can come and harvest some peaches from a peach tree, or some mulberries from our mulberry tree. We also do plant and produce giveaways fairly frequently. And we have like some seed kits that we give out as well, because we really want to encourage people to not only come to our site to get the food that they need, but also think about planting in their own spaces, whether that's just a patio, they have a backyard or a front yard, like how they can be self-sustaining in their homes as well. You're muted, Danielle.
Sorry about the controls. Yeah, it's so intense, and it's, yeah, love the connection of all the interconnections of all the programs that you're working on. I'm getting questions too about, because of the audience that we have today, is so much coming from companies, industries, corporations. Some of the questions people are asking me or ask you is how do you already work with companies and industries, if that's the case, if they are part of your programs, but also in the near future, what are some of the opportunities that you see coming from the private sector that you may have in your area, in your geographies?
Mm-hmm. Is that directed at both of us or just me?
Let me do Brian. No.
No, I mean, I refer back to my previous comment that it's always about partnership. The organization was founded as, as I stated in my intro, in partnership with Ford Motor Company, Chrysler, now Stellantis, and General Motors and the UAW. So it's always been about that partnership because this is the important story that we're telling. However, we fit in a space that we can tell a story from a neutral perspective. So it's not propaganda, it's not shilling, it's about that partnership. And every project we go into, you have to find that right person. I've said this, along the way, it's like, it's all about the people. Putting a big label on it and say the company sponsors it, but it comes down to, and when you have to make a relationship with the person who's going to be the person to move the things ahead. I can name, as I think back to the process of building the park, you can name that individual that was able to trigger the relationship with Marathon Petroleum or trigger the relationship with Ford or talk to the Michigan Department of Transportation's huge infrastructure and say, here's the one person that can drive it forward. So those individuals are key, and they're just delivering on that promise, finding mutual agreeable goals and delivering on it, because nobody has, more than 24 hours in the day. They've got to be productive in what they do. And when we come to the table and say, we're going to make this park happen, we're accountable for that. And we go to the other partners and do all the work that we have to do to make it happen. And we see it through. So I think that's the way you deal with those partnerships, is be accountable to it and find the right people that fit the discussion that you're trying to have.
Super interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and for such a large area, you do have a strong industrial presence. I mean, the industry really define, and highways and roads define the landscape where you work. Yeah. Tia, how do you? I know you're on a neighborhood scale. How would companies that may do you have any right of ways or pipelines or anything crossing the neighborhood that you think could be of value in engaging?
Yeah, one thing that I think is unique about our project is that almost every city agency owns a piece of the land. So we have a Department of Transportation right away. We have some space that's allocated to DPW. The park is still Baltimore City Recreation and Parkland. And thinking, outside of just our target market is just people who live within a 2-mile radius from our site. But our neighborhood is like, we're not serving everyone in our neighborhood. And so thinking about one of the companies we have here, BGE, there's a power line, and they just planted that power line with some native plants, and they made a nice little pathway. So just thinking of ways that, if a company has land that they own in a predominantly underserved neighborhood, like how they can either create some sort of community space, work with that community to come to that point together to say, like, hey, we have this space, we have all this unused space. What do you think would be a good use of time and space for your neighborhood? That would be essential. And I think for us as an organization, like, we could do none of this work without volunteers. Like, we have a tiny team of 3 people. You think we could plant 50 trees by ourselves? Heck no. So partnering with companies and divisions of those companies who can provide that volunteer power to help us clear the trails and build these nature play spaces and plant the trees and weed and move frickin' pounds of mulch from one site to another. Those are like key and essential functions of what, would help improve this space, not only this space, but other spaces within our neighborhood. So I think those are definitely some good ways that corporations can play a part. And even if there's not like a formal organization founded in that neighborhood, but there in Baltimore specifically, there's a lot of community associations who would help drive a project like that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I love that, they bring in employees of companies to your space would be a great, opportunity. Gets people out of their office, and understanding the relationship between their right of way and and by the way, yeah, excellent PG&E is a member of the Wildlife Habitat Council, so I think they're on the hook now to help you formally. Yeah, and some other questions are coming in. I think people are kind of very interested in how you engage your partners. I know you've talked already about it, but if there's anything any other thoughts that you want to provide us to how to engage partners? Many of our companies, that's a critical issue for them, is to not only do their conservation work within their fence, but also to go outside of the fence, across the fence, to reach out to the communities where they live and work. So any other thoughts that you think, consideration people?
I can, so when I first started this project, I went to a community association meeting. Now, remember I said our neighborhood has over 30,000 residents, right? This meeting had 15 people in it. And I was like, okay, this is not feasible. Like, a lot of people are missing. So if you all are going to these community association meetings and you sort of have those numbers with you, like, wait a minute, this neighborhood has this many residents, there are only 10 people here, and there's usually always like 6 or 7 people that show up no matter what. So that there are a lot of people missing. And so what we did is we looked specifically at our site, who lives around our site, and those are the people who we did the door knocking with, and we brought 10-pound boxes of fresh produce, and we introduced ourselves, talked about our project, said this is what we're doing down the street. How do you feel about that? Do you have children? Like, how old are your kids? What grades are they in? And that sort of and then we sort of analyzed all this data, and that gave us more information than what was provided on the census 10 years ago, about who currently lives here now. And if you don't know, Baltimore, unlike many other cities, is going through a large gentrification process. And so there has been a lot of neighborhood turnover. So the historical data that you may have about a neighborhood may not be relevant anymore. So how you would engage with some folks, that lived there 10, 15 years ago may not be the same people who live there now. We used to have a lot of young families in this neighborhood, and now it's predominantly elderly people who live alone. And so how we engage with them will be different, and the questions that we ask will be different. We wouldn't really focus so much on, the children's side of programming, but how can we help you as a lone senior? What kind of social support would you like to have? And from doing those door-to-door surveys and getting people's contact information, we've been able to sort of make sure that we have built some raised beds, because the seniors said that they need somewhere to go for their social time, because there's no place around here for them to do that. And so we have sort of this community garden aspect, which is not something that we thought we would need, because everybody in this neighborhood has a front yard and a backyard. Pretty much everybody has a front yard and a backyard. And so we thought oh, people can just garden at their homes. But folks want to come to a single place to garden. And so we sort of changed our model to ensure that we have some raised beds for our seniors. And that's just something, I think, as most people have a community engagement, most corporations, I think, have a community engagement office. And so their job should be to engage the actual community. And you can't just, it's not enough. I will say this, it is not enough to just send an email to the president of a community association and say, hey, we want to meet with you guys this day, and then show up. There needs to be more groundwork done to ensure that that particular community feels like they have voice and agency and a seat at that table, and they're actually helping to build that table, not just having a seat at it, to discuss a project that is happening in their neighborhood. And if you're dealing with a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood, the question is going to be, who are you building this for? Are you building this for us, or are you building this for the people you're trying to bring here?
Right.
So come with answers.
Said be prepared. No, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, that really is the story. So if the audience is made up of corporations who are asking how can we better engage, I think that authenticity that Atiya is talking about is what it is. Don't just have a person who's a comma in their job title is, oh, they're also the community engagement. That, you know, there should be their role, and there should be some real authorship over that. They should be able to go out and really get a feel and come back and report and talk about what the needs are, not just, hey, we wanted to do this and they're not going for it. But no, what they really need is this, and what they really want is this. And let's continue to move forward in the direction that's best serving the community, you know, and that's the bottom line. Sometimes it's not the easiest thing, and most times it's not the easiest thing, but it's the most important thing, because to really get that effective outcome, you know, if you start at that level, if you build on a strong foundation, it'll be better in the long run.
Yes, I will echo that. It is not the easiest, and trust building takes time. Like, it's not a case where you can just be like, okay, these are the questions that we want answered. Go to this neighborhood and see like what they say, because those people are going to knock on somebody's door and they're going to get the door slammed in their face. So plan for, you know, at least 6 months, a year, maybe, just to get the folks comfortable with seeing those people. And if you can, not in like a tokenizing way, but like understand the racial makeup of a neighborhood before you just send somebody out there. And, you know, make sure that that person is sort of educated on, you know, that neighborhood and the historical traumas and the historical wounding and all the stuff that has gone into city building. Because sometimes it's not just, you know, the corporations, it's mistrust, distrust with city agencies or corporations, foundations, people with money in general, that turns a lot of people off.
Yeah, many times we coming from the community perspective, we come in to corporations with a wish list, thinking that they're gonna check each one of those and share those with us and mobilize on our behalf, and it's not the case. I mean, each company is going to be very different from one another in what they can provide, offer a partner, the way that they can partner or not. So it really, yeah, it's definitely a challenge. But you're right about both of you. Is how do you initiate those efforts? They have to come from both ways. Yeah, both sides of the fence. Any thoughts? I'm still getting some silly questions about, do you have alleys? This is from somebody that works in alleys in Detroit, who I will not mention. Alleyways in Baltimore, and can you make use of those?
What?
I don't know. I mean, we're getting down to the wire here, so you know, there will be other questions, but I know that I've been told that we only have 2 minutes. So, okay. Yeah. So anything else that you want to address? I mean, if it's alleys, no alleys, trees, what are our next steps? You know, from the Wildlife Habitat Council, you know, what should be our next steps in working with you and helping you and participate in your efforts?
I think it will be more on like the community engagement aspect, just like having the corporations understand the importance of community engagement and why it matters so much. And that, again, it's not something that you can just skip over. It is the most important thing. And I will provide an example of, you know, an organization that wanted to like plant trees in a neighborhood, and, you know, all the neighbors were like, no, we don't want no damn trees here because y'all don't take care of them. Like, you're going to plant these trees and then what? Like, you think we can afford to maintain a tree? So, you know, there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be, and it's not just that the community is saying no, they have valid reasons, you know, for saying no to certain things. So just understanding that, and again, coming with, you know, open, honest, authentic relationship building as much as possible.
And Brian, you're celebrating the National Pollinator Week, so our company's helping you at the June.
Natural segue, yes, absolutely, yeah. So June 21st to 27th, National Pollinator Week. as part of our work with the National Park Service, we want to encourage people to take that ownership, and that could be a whole other panel. But our role has been to engage our large landscape partners, people who own huge swaths of property like Ford Motor Company, and say, what can you do? Turns out they were already doing a lot, and they just needed somebody to come to them, like Atiya said, and say, hey, you're in the same boat that I'm in. I didn't realize. I'm in my silo, and I didn't realize that people are beekeeping at their locations, and they planted wild grasses to be pollinator friendly. So they were very intentional about it, and we just needed to connect those dots. And now we're doing it with a number of our big corporate partners, and then local community partners. So yeah, on June 23rd, 9:30, we'll be at the 4th Street Bridge Park in Detroit with a pollinator event to encourage even more.
Wonderful. We'll be there.
We'll be there. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank both of you and say, this has been a special hour for me to learn from you and to share that you share with us, with the Wildlife Habitat Council, our members, our participants and attendees to this conference. I think we learn a lot from you. So thank you so much. And I think I'm done. I don't know how to turn this thing off.
So I just want to echo Daniel's sentiment and thank you, Atiya, Brian, and Daniel for this insightful conversation. We really do appreciate the work that you do and look forward to the projects that you'll be working on in the future. So for everyone watching, thank you for joining us at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our virtual company lounges will open. So if you've received an invitation for that, please join your companies for a virtual gathering with your colleagues. And at 3 p.m., our closing session features speakers from Bayer and Waste Management and will be moderated by WHC's Josanne Bonneau. See you there.
Thank you.